This is a video about the founder of Asian American psychology, Reiko Homma. She's a clinical psychologist who focuses on providing better suited mental health care to culturally diverse minorities and women. Chu was born in 1933 in Niigata, Japan. In these years, Chu volunteered at her church and for child care programs, which was where she first was exposed to social work and the impact it had on her community. During her upbringing, a lot was happening in Japan. The country was under a Great Depression, and they believed that military expansion would solve their economic hardships that were heavily due to the country's issues exporting goods to Western countries due to racist barriers. This led to the events of Japanese involvement in World War II. Psychology in Japan had been somewhat prominent since the 20th century and was heavily focused on Zen practice or meditation. The Japanese believed that it was a connection to one's inner experience and applied it similarly to psychotherapy. However, they did not believe in the connection between the mind and science. Amane Nishi was the first to give psychology a name in Japan after it was officially imported from the West in the 1970s. The name was Shinrigaku, Shin translating to mind, Ri translating to reason, and Gaku translating to science. In 1988, the first Japanese psychologist, Yejiro Motora, furthered the discipline through lecturing about psychophysics at universities. This gave way to psychology being applied to both industrial and military uses during World War I. However, psychology in Japan shifted from German Gestalt psychology towards a more Americanized version of psychology post-World War I. After World War II, she went to school in Japan and earned an MA in English and International Business at Tokyo University. Her education was thanks to the post-war educational reform in Japan in 1947, which shifted Japanese higher education towards a more Americanized education plan that included co-education. That being said, she was one of the very few women to graduate from her class, and despite her higher level education, she was rejected from many job opportunities. In 1958, she moved to San Francisco, and until 1952, there was a heavy restriction on the amount of Japanese immigrants to the United States. Nevertheless, the San Francisco Bay Area was and continues to be an area with a high Japanese population, known as Japantown, since 1906. It was common for Japanese immigrants to move here after the war in search of economic prospects and stability. In 1964, Chu earned her MA in social work from the University of California, Berkeley. During those years, she learned a lot about structural racism in the mental health system from working in a psychiatric clinic in San Francisco. This was also the time of the free speech movement and the Asian American movement at the university, and it was a decade of uproar advocating for equality and civil rights. In 1976, Chu earned her PhD from California School of Professional Psychology in Berkeley, California. She emerged into the field passionate about civil rights and social issues that began to receive more attention post the emergence of humanism in psychology in the 1960s and social psychology later on. There was also more acceptance of women in the discipline at this time, with the creation of the Association for Women in Psychology, the Society for Psychology of Women, and the Committee on Women in Psychology. In the 1970s, it was also a time where a push for more focus on multicultural issues in psychology began due to the increase in ethnically diverse individuals entering the discipline. Throughout her career, Chu held many important positions. She worked for the National Institute of Mental Health in San Francisco, where she worked to develop mental health care programs for ethnically diverse populations that were geared towards their wants and needs. She was deputy director at the San Francisco Community Health Services, where she worked to develop community programs for minorities and women. However, her position here was cut in 1984, which led to the petition of its restoration by Asian American activists. Following this, she was appointed the first female and first Asian director of the Community Mental Health Services and Substance Abuse Services, where she developed programs that were targeted towards women and children. Her career shifted in 1995 after there was a major earthquake in Kobe, Japan. She went back to Japan as a Fulbright senior scholar and constructed a program around mental health services for victims of natural disasters at the Kobe University Medical School in Japan. This disaster represented the need for an increase in mental health support in the country and led to the development of counseling and clinical psychology in Japan. In the early 2000s, Chu led the clinical psychology master program in Tokyo. Throughout her career, she was a member of the American Psychological Association. At the APA, she served on the Minority Fellowship Committee. However, from her time there, she discovered that the APA's use of treatments were not culturally sensitive. On the other hand, one of her proudest achievements was that she was an early group member in the development of the AAPA in 1972. They wanted to create an association dedicated to Asian psychology. By 1995, their small association had a total of almost 400 members, and from 1997 to 1999, Chu herself served as their president and designed mentoring programs to aid Asian American women. Today, she practices and provides mental health services to non-English speaking minorities in Japantown in San Francisco through a nonprofit organization called Nishi Care. She says that minorities have a unique struggle at various levels, whether they are first, second, or third generation, and whether the issues deal with their family relationships at work or at school, there are cultural differences that must be reconciled.